Hi there, my name's Justin Parry. I am COO, Head of Product for Immerse Learning, which is a platform which we provide for the distribution and collaborative VR experience. So I'm here today to talk to you about VR disruption in learning. Title is Records to Downloads, but there's actually a couple of words missing in here potentially, because actually we've gone beyond these two things. So the title was actually misleading, and I was going to start by throwing out the question to you. What do you think comes next? Where are we now? From records to downloads to what? Any ideas? Say again? I did this before with a bunch of people, and the first answer was streaming, which is a pretty reasonable answer and would be true because streaming is now the most popular form of music consumption as of 2016. But there's actually another one. It's actually two things, and it's the format that grew by 53% in the UK in 2016. That format is records. So that's the total number of record sales in the US for 2013. As I said, it's 53% up from last year in the UK. So we're seeing this huge growth in the record. And it's kind of interesting to reflect on why that is. You know, is it about ownership? Well, yes, because people still want to buy CDs, but CDs are actually in decline. And then there's all those other formats that people didn't take up and didn't carry on with, like tapes and mini disc. So it's not just about ownership. And I would propose that a big part of the record is the whole experience, right? It's taking the record, opening the record up. If it's a gatefold, you've got the lovely visuals. You've maybe got the lyrics displayed nicely everywhere. You take the record out, it's all very tactile, it's tangible. You take it out of the packaging, you place it on the record player, and you put the needle on. It's an experience. So I would propose that actually, alongside streaming, where everybody wants everything right now, this minute, on demand, 33 million songs on Spotify, that people are actually want two things. They want instant everything and they want experience. They want it all. They want to have their cake and eat it, if you like. I would propose, obviously this is a talk about VR, so we're always going to come to this. VR actually offers both of those things. VR is a digital format. It's available in the cloud, so you can just grab it whenever you like. But it also offers experience. Now, it's obviously not quite the same as picking up a record, but for anybody that's actually had to go with it, it's not bad. It's pretty close. You do feel like you're having an experience. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today was experience. And I'm going to do that, first of all, by channeling it through the medium of Tarzan, weirdly. So this is Tarzan and the fire extinguisher lesson. And for me, this is a good example. It's a silly example, but it's a good example of actually, you know, what we're talking about when we talk about VR experience. So let's imagine Tarzan comes out of the jungle, and for some reason he's put onto a fire safety course, right? So he goes along, and the trainer shows him the fire extinguisher, talks him through all of the kind of, you know, the background, and then says, right, now, so Tarzan, we're going to actually learn how you use the fire extinguisher. So Tarzan's kind of like, oh, great, fantastic. And the trainer shows him this. Now, obviously there's nothing wrong with e-learning, but you can imagine Tarzan stood there, looking at the real fire extinguisher sat there, and wondering why he has to go to this computer and you know, learn a whole load of new tricks. Because actually what the trainer has to do in order to show him how to use this, Tarzan, remember, from the jungle, no cultural, technical experience, he has to, the trainer has to say, okay, so first of all, I'm going to say about computer. Computer has a mouse, and then I move the mouse around, you'll see it moves this little arrow on the screen over here, they sort of correspond. And then you've got to click on some colors and shapes, they're called buttons, and then there's going to be some drop-down menus, and there's going to be words, and all of this. You can imagine Tarzan stood there sort of thinking, what? Where's the fire extinguisher? Because the fire extinguisher is a number of levels back from all these things that he has to learn. He's thinking, why can't I just pick the fire extinguisher up? And you can imagine the trainer saying, oh, it's pretty expensive firing a fire extinguisher. If we had to get everybody doing that, it's going to cost us a fortune. But you might imagine that Tarzan's next thought would be, well, can't I just have a replica, like a fake one? And he would be, I think, I would propose that he would be right. because Tarzan has to learn how to use the learning. Right? That's kind of, if we're talking about somebody like him, no experience, he has to learn how to use the learning. And it's not just a problem for him, it's a problem for all of us, but we just sort of forget about it. And to really understand why it's a problem for us, we actually have to look at the history of human-computer interaction. So it started with computers, and people were working with formulas and equations and numbers and symbols in computers, right? And we had to work out a way to interact with that. So we started with the keyboard and with the command line interface. But that wasn't good enough, so then we wanted to be able to interact with visual things, because we needed to be able to do more. So we created visual interfaces, and we created the mouse and peripherals to allow us to do all those things. And we also created GUI, the guided user interface, which over the years has developed to allow us to do some amazing things, right? I mean, this is a whole industry here, UX, that has been designed to solve this problem. But it is fundamentally about solving the problem of interacting with the abstract. So when you come up with something as simple as the example of Tarzan with the fire extinguisher, it doesn't quite do it, actually, because it's been designed for a completely different problem. It's been designed for interacting with the abstract. And what comes with that? Well, actually, before I move on, so the whole UX industry has actually been designed to try to stop the guided user interface and all the problems that come with kind of having to deal with abstract information from being too confusing. That is what that whole industry does. Right? Let's be clear. And this is one of the things we're trying to avoid, is extraneous cognitive load, right? All those things that we've put in place, the mouse, the cursor, all those steps are actually getting in the way of fundamentally the content, which seems to sit in Tarzan's head somewhere over there. He's got so many barriers, and we all face these barriers, we've just not realized it. What we're actually looking to do is to focus on the germane cognitive load. That is the cognitive load that is focused on the activity itself and enables us to create a permanent store of knowledge. So the closer that you can get to that fire extinguisher, actually interacting with it, the less abstraction, the closer you are to being able to load all of your learning with this germane cognitive load, right? And it's not just all the things that I've mentioned before that get in the way. There's a whole bunch of other things. Thanks. So, you know, what if you've got something on your mind? You know, we've probably all got this on our minds. It's going to come up a lot, I'm guessing, today in the speeches. And then you've got your mouse, you've got cursor, you've got the usability problems I mentioned, you've got the annoying hipster, somebody who comes over and chats to you. It doesn't have to be a hipster, obviously. Before you get in the way of content. So it's a much broader kind of level of distraction, even beyond having to deal with the guided user interface and peripherals. So VR does something interesting, and this is a quote that I heard from Donald Clark. He said, VR totally floods your consciousness, So actually, as well as kind of offering a very interesting alternative to the GUI, it actually removes all of this distraction as well. You can't be thinking about anything else in a VR experience. I don't know if anybody's tried it. I'm presuming lots of people have. If it's a good one and it has an outcome in mind, it's something that you're supposed to do, if you're purposefully employed, you can't even think of Donald Trump. It's very, very powerful. It floods your consciousness. Here's another interesting example, or just carrying on from that. It's also non-age specific. Sorry, that's gone a bit loud, isn't it? So here, this is a picture of my daughter. She's 6. That's Jeremy Corbyn. It's not Jeremy Corbyn. It's a Chelsea pensioner from an air show that I did last year. This guy was in his 80s, right? And they're just in there. They're gone. They're gone. In fact, the Chelsea pensioner was more gone than my daughter, to the point where he nearly pulled all the cables out of the machine because he just wandered off. He was loving it so much. But not only were they completely immersed, and this is a response that we get every single time, almost every single time, I'd say 90% of the time, it's intuitive. So the first thing people say when they take the headset off is always, wow, right? That's what people go, oh, wow. But the next thing that they say is, oh, it's really intuitive. And a 6-year-old and a Chelsea pensioner can both pick this up and start using it and interacting and doing the training in 10 seconds. No exaggeration. Now, there are some considerations in there from a VR design perspective. I would be biased and suggest that we do it really well. But you know, if it's done well, people are in there and they're learning immediately. They are not having to learn how to use the learning, right, which is the Tarzan problem. And the interesting thing about this is that they are interacting with it as if it were a real experience. Now, this is an expert. Not sure how everybody feels about experts these days, but this is a guy called Jeremy Bailenson from Stanford. He's he's the director for virtual human interaction. This is his quote. So we are treating it as if we are making a physical action. And this is a really powerful statement if you just think about what that means for learning and all the things that come before that around, you know, abstraction. We think our brain interprets this as if we're actually doing it. Next thing, for those of a nervous disposition, I'm just going to show some learning theory. Again, don't know how you feel about that. Now, obviously, these have varying degrees of debunk on these things. The one on the left in particular. Actually, interestingly, the one on the left, this was never actually about retention. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is the kind of 10% what they read, 20% of what they hear, 90% of what they do. Now, this has been totally debunked. And actually, the original model that was created by Egder Dale didn't have these retention percentages on it. This actually was about levels of abstraction, which is really interesting. If you go back to his original model, it was about abstraction. So there is still something interesting in there, even if we're not sure about the retention. It's about how far away from you, how abstracted does this thing that I'm trying to do have to be. And of course, you've got the experiential learning cycle. So even if, you know, these models, we might say, yes, but we've moved on from this, there's still interesting things in there. And fundamentally, it's really as simple as this. This is what we do. And this is inarguable, and it doesn't really matter about theory. There's lots of theories, I'm sure, that will come as VR moves forward. There's lots of research that can validate the use of VR and talk about its strengths. But this is really, really what it's all about. And here's another thing about the VR experience. Content. So I noticed an LPI Twitter poll the other day that said the favorite learning technology for 2017, this was 52% of respondents said content curation, technology, content curation. I listened to a Radio 4 show about curation. It was all about the movement away from creation to curation. And one of the most heavily advertised roles at the moment is digital content curator. So there's this kind of weird thing that's happening with content, and it's related to the cloud, which is people are getting really skeptical, you know, and they've got this kind of wall that they put up because they're bombarded by information and content and media from all these different places, not just in their working lives, but in their private lives as well. So there's a massive sort of filter that takes place. And I don't know if anybody else would relate to this, but there is a sense that there is a factory of just all this amorphous content that's being churned out and directed at a market without actually, you know, obviously there's fantastic things going on. There'd be loads of that stuff here, but this is, I think, a perception that people have, content. The fact that you even call it content actually seems kind of weird and sort of reductive when you actually think about it. But here's a revelation. VR turns content into experience. This is what happens. People treat it differently, and you have to think about that quote from Jeremy Bailenson. People treat it as a real thing. They treat it as a physical interaction. So you can take content, you can make it something that feels experiential. And we talk about user experience and so forth, but this is a different type of experience. And just to give you an example of that, concrete, I'm going to talk about some of the work that we do. This is a model that we were given by a customer of a landing gear. This is a very basic model, right? This is what we call a white-boxed model. No criticism of it, because it was designed to do a certain thing. It was designed to tell people how to take apart this landing gear, right? But it was housed in e-learning. So somebody was tasked with having to figure out how to get somebody to remove that, to take that landing gear apart. And so the customer said to us, you know, can we add VR? What can we do to sort of, you know, change this? What they wanted, their desire was to sort of introduce VR so that they could move away from having designed these kind of experiences. I'm going to show a screenshot. You're going to have to trust me that this is good, because VR doesn't always transcend unless you put the headset on. But this is what we did, right? So we turned it into a VR experience. This same content, we plugged it into a Vive, and we actually introduced multiplayer, social collaborative elements, which is part of our platform. But the point is that we turned this kind of content into something that was a genuine experience. And even I, who work in VR, I've been doing it for quite a long time now, I couldn't believe what had happened, because I was sort of skeptical about the quality of the model. Everybody in the office was kind of going, wow, what are we going to do with it though? Is it going to be any good? But we got in there and it's brilliant. And again, you have to take my word for it, but it had turned into an experience. No extraneous cognitive load, no annoying hipsters, no distractions, no unnecessary building of GUI and all sorts of UX kind of considerations, right? And this is another interesting thing about this is it can actually simplify the process of content creation. So this is not about so rather than having to sort of imagine that you have to start from scratch, everything has to be built entirely from scratch. We can take models that have kind of limited application, bring them into VR, not just us, just VR in general, and you can turn them into something completely different, particularly physical objects, as I mentioned before. There's kind of less design going on. It's more about just getting straight to the heart of the matter, the domain load, right? That's kind of what we're trying to do, is get people interacting with that as quickly as possible. And then the other thing about that is that it means that actually doesn't have to be that expensive. And this is a genuine. I don't know who created this model. I actually think it might have been a student. I'm not sure, because this was actually a technical vocational college. But we turned that into something just completely and utterly different, and it was using existing content and just plugging in some services. And this is where the kind of VR industry is going in general, right? There's a problem around content creation. But these things, these issues around creation, these content issues are being solved all the time, to the point where it will become less of an issue. So, the thing to bear in mind, I guess, here is, if we think about VR experience, we're not necessarily talking about Grand Theft Auto. I think people often have that in their minds, and if you go and just try some of these consumer experiences, you can be easily lured into thinking that you're going to have to spend tons and tons of money. This is just a prime example that you don't have to. You can use existing models, you can use cheap models, whatever. You could buy the models, and so on. And it can all work because of this. With VR, this is a personal statement. I've got nothing to back this up whatsoever. I can back this up on the basis of 300 plus demos with people, right? I've probably demoed VR, I reckon, as much as anybody. Engagement comes for free. This is the interesting thing. It's totally for free, which means that you can focus on, you can stop thinking about how to engage people. Oh, they're going to find it boring. You can actually focus on the learning outcomes, right? Again, the domain load, focus on that. One other thing to say on this, and back to that point about content creation, is that industry is changing as well. So it's easy to sort of focus in on VR, but content, 3D content, forgetting 360 video at the moment, but 3D content, that industry is moving as well. And that's actually one of the key problems, not just in the B2B space, but in the consumer space as well, is the creation of content. You've still got to create this thing, right? VR is another medium for presenting that, but you still have to create. Interesting developments. You'll all recognize this, Microsoft Paint. The latest version of this is this. All right? So the Windows Creator version includes Paint 3D. This is they are flogging this heavily at all of their shows. So there is a move, even within the kind of, I say even within, it's a bit biased, isn't it? But even with the Windows, within Windows, they are introducing the opportunity for the layperson to build 3D. So going forward, the creation of 3D will no longer be the domain of the vendor. It will be the domain of a community, or the domain of anybody here who wants to get involved. There's phone apps that will allow you to capture three-dimensional objects, import it straight into Paint. That's one of Windows have got an app that does that. There's photogrammetry, which is a system whereby you can take photographs of things, lots of photographs, and it pieces it all together, turns it into a 3D model. You can do it for a whole environment. We could do it here. We could do it for this whole conference. And you can go in and walk around those things. It's amazing. So the content creation sector is moving forward as well. So the space is moving in multiple ways. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. The last thing I was going to leave you with was, I guess, the final word. Because for me, this is something that is absolutely it's back to the point that I made earlier, but this is absolutely key to sort of understanding, I guess, where to begin with VR, why VR, where to begin with VR, and why it doesn't cost so much. So as a closing statement, save Tarzan from the abstract fire extinguisher of death, but spend wisely because VR gives you so much for free. And that's me. What time have we got? Any questions from anybody? 10 minutes for questions. Okay, cool. Any questions? Yep, okay. Say again. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think so. The thrust of this presentation is about the physical, right? So, but it doesn't all have to be physical. There are other applications as well. You know, role play is a big part of it. Being able to put yourself in other people's shoes, being able to experience completely new places. It doesn't have to be sort of physical objects and manipulation. But in the realm of physical objects, some of the projects that we've been working on are submarines. So fully working consoles within submarines, taking apart manufacturing machinery. You could just do something as simple as, I say, the landing gear, which has got a series of different components that you take apart. We're working on an automotive manufacturing project where people on the production floor will be able to have access to the machines that they have to go onto the floor and learn. So before they even interact with them, they're able to test them or play with them. So those are examples of, you know, the physical, I guess. But in terms of role play, there's all sorts of interesting things that you could use as well. So even in the kind of, we've talked about, well, we're talking to customers ourselves about even something like language learning, where actually you're able to put people into a context to be able to drive that sort of contextual learning, purely by virtue of being somebody or being somewhere. So it's a very wide application. The reason I sort of give it the sort of physical thrust here is because I think it's the obvious place to begin. I wouldn't limit it to that because there are so many other things that you could do with it. But I just think people sort of get easily caught up on, you know, I'm not really sure how I apply this, you know, and it might be that actually there's not a way to apply it for you right now. But if anything like this is a problem, fire extinguisher up to submarines, then this may be something that's pretty powerful, you know, on that basis. So the question was about replacing classroom experiences, which is, you know, it's not obviously an intrinsic part of VR. This isn't a planted question, by the way, either. This is, but you can do it, and that's what we offer. We're a cloud-based VR experience, which means that you can have people from anywhere in the world logging in VR and coming together to learn. So you can have a subject matter expert that's in Iraq. We have aviation teachers that are based in Iraq and Saudi Arabia that are teaching pilots elsewhere in the world. So you can have your subject matter experts signing in and walking students, learners through a VR experience completely and utterly remotely. And then the other interesting thing actually about that is because it's all in the cloud, and because you have to distribute that information out to all the other learners, you can capture absolutely everything that people do as well, which is obviously a critical part of this whole thing, is understanding the value to the learner. And the opportunities for tracking in VR are immense, because every single thing that you do, if I hesitate over this button for a minute, you can track the hesitation. You know, the tracking and the measurement possibilities are endless. In fact, I would argue that the flip side, the actual problem with VR from a reporting perspective, is just working out what to track. But all that can come as part of a distributed classroom. It just depends on how you want to, you know, leverage VR as a kind of technology. Is that a reasonable answer? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? I think I finished a bit early, but yeah, thanks very much for listening anyway. Thank you.